The wickedness of the Benjamite tribe. In our last story, we learned about the tribe of Dan stealing idols from the house of Micah and their violent siege over an innocent village. The tribe of Dan found a home at the expense of others, and Israel continued to sin before God. Now we learn about the journey of a young Levite and his concubine. As they seek their own path away from God, they fall victim to all sorts of dark evils, as inspired by the book of Judges. Israel continued its fall from the favor of God. The days of parted seas and manna falling from heaven were long forgotten, and even the holiest of people did what was right in their own eyes. Pursuing peace, blessing, and kindness was a distant virtue. Now people wandered the land without purpose. In those days there was a certain Levite who was sojourning in the wilderness of Ephraim. This Levite, called to be a man who serves the people of God, left his wife and took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem. Together they traveled, but the woman was unfaithful to him and traveled back to Bethlehem. Heartbroken and lovesick, the Levite traveled back to Bethlehem to win back his concubine's affection. He brought gifts and wrote poems, and outside her father's house he sought to serenade her. Her father opened the door, overjoyed to see that the Levite returned for his daughter. He invited the Levite to stay with him for 3 days. The Levite gladly accepted the invitation, yet there was a strangeness in the father's smile. A lingering wickedness that was too subtle to spot clearly hovered over the house. The Levite ignored it, wanting only to win back his concubine's heart. So he entered the father's house and stayed for 3 days. The two men ate, drank, and exchanged tales of their travels and exploits. The wine continued to pour, and the food continued to be cooked. Time moved quickly, and on the 4th day the Levite and his woman arose to leave. The father put his hand on the Levite's shoulder and smiled. "Why don't you stay for one last meal before you go?" he said. So the two of them ate together once again. Their meal and conversation lasted hours, and the morning quickly turned into dusk. The Levite opened the door to depart and looked at the horizon. He was surprised to see that the night had come so quickly. The skies turned into a deep red as the sun set against the bare sky. It was an uneasy sunset, and it sent chills down the Levite's neck. "Ah, what do you know?" the father said from behind him. "It is already sunset. You might as well stay one more night." The Levite was uneasy about spending another night, but the father insisted, so he stayed another night. On the 5th morning, the Levite gathered his things, his woman and his servant, and the 3 of them prepared to depart from the father's house. It was still dark, but the girl's father had already been awake, tending to the fields. He shouted from a distance, saying, "Strengthen your hearts. Stay, and I will make you breakfast until the sun arises." So the 3 of them remained. Time seemed to move at a different pace in that dining room. Drinks flowed like a river into the Levite's cup, and he found himself lost in a drunken stupor that lasted all day. Slapping himself awake, the Levite thanked the girl's father and finally went off to depart. But the sun had already begun its descent, and day was almost over. "Well, there's no harm in spending the night again," the father said with a jolly grin. His rotted teeth could barely be spotted underneath his white beard. "First thing tomorrow morning you can all start your journey," he said. The Levite peered into his eyes. The uneasy chills overcame him again. The Levite nodded politely, and the woman's father left the room to go prepare the beds. Then he took his concubine and servant, and they made a mad dash for the door. They saddled their donkeys and rode off. He would not spend the night again, for he feared that it could very well be his last if he did. The trio traveled to Jebus, which is now Jerusalem. The day was nearly over, and the sun was halfway below the horizon. The Levite's servant said to him, "Let us descend into the city of the Jebusites and spend the night. It may become dangerous soon." The Levite looked uneasy. He had heard rumors of the Jebusites and was not sure if he wanted to stay in their city. So they turned away to Gibeah as the sun set behind them. Gibeah belonged to the tribe of Benjamin. and the Levite was sure they could find lodging among God's people. However, they had no such luck. The three of them knocked on every door in the city, seeking a place to rest their heads, yet each one turned them away. So the Levite, his concubine, and his servant huddled in the courtyard in the middle of the city. Alone and cold they slept, without blankets or food to warm them. It was still night, and the Levite had finally fallen into a deep sleep. His snores were interrupted by an old man poking at him and his companions. The Levite jolted awake and rose to his feet. The old man backed away and gave a nervous smile. "What are you doing out here in the middle of the night?" he said. "This place is dangerous at night. We are traveling back to Ephraim, but no one has taken us in to spend the night. We have donkeys in need of straw and water, and we are in need of food." The Levite responded, hoping desperately that the man could help them. "Of course," the man said, "I can care for all your needs. Just please do not spend the night out here. There would be trouble awaiting you." The old man seemed nervous as he led them back to his home. He was constantly shining his torch into the alleys and peering over his shoulder. Another uneasy feeling came over the Levite, and the four of them entered the house safely. The four of them were warming themselves by the fire, laughing and eating warm food. The old man's family came out to join them, and they ate, drank, and laughed with one another. Their laughter was interrupted by a violent banging on the man's door. The Levite looked towards the man, and his face turned ghostly white. The man arose to go answer the door, and behold, the men from the city surrounded the entire house. The Levite could catch a small glimpse of the men through the door. An ancient wickedness could be seen in their eyes, the same wickedness that tormented the hearts of Sodom and Gomorrah long ago. One of them stood at the entrance of the home and pointed straight to the Levite. "Bring out your petty little Levite, old man." The words slithered out of his grinning mouth. "We would like to have our way with him," he said. The Levite jumped to his feet and pressed his back up against the wall. His eyes widened as he watched the old man squirm near the door. "Please, my brothers," the old man trembled, "do not do such a wicked thing. These people are guests in my home." But the men of the city craved the satisfaction of forcing themselves on a young man. They had no regard for politeness or honor. They wanted what they wanted, and they would take it forcibly. For this was the state of Israel's heart after they turned away from God. The men began to enter the home, but the old man stopped them, saying, "No, no! Behold, here is my daughter, she is a virgin. And here is the Levite's concubine, she is very beautiful. Take them, and spare the Levite." The men seized the concubine and drug her into the darkness. Violent screams and evil laughs could be heard from the distance as the men abused and raped her. It was truly a dark time for Israel. What began as idol worship slowly transitioned into a corruption that rivaled the wicked kingdoms of old. Dawn began to break. The woman crawled out of the alleyway. Her face was swollen from being beaten, and her clothes were torn apart. Barely alive, she slept on the doorstep of the old man, waiting for the Levite to come to her. The sun had fully risen, and the Levite opened the door slowly to see if the coast was clear. He found the woman on the floor and said, "Quick, let us be going before they return." The woman was silent and still. He shook her and said, "There is no time for delay. Get up and let's go." But she still lay there. So the Levite picked her up and lay her on his donkey. The Levite had finally made it back to his home. He came to wake up his concubine, only to realize that she was dead. There she laid lifeless. The Levite boiled with anger and blamed the men for killing her, even though it was not just the men that slew her. His own cowardice is what killed her. In a heartbroken and shameful fury, the Levite took a knife and began tearing the woman's body apart. Limb by limb, he filleted her and separated her body. He tore her into 12 pieces and sent her body throughout all the territory of Israel. Pieces of her body hung for all of Israel to behold. Her bloodied and hanging limbs represented the divided and corrupt hearts of Israel. The land trembled, and God wept over their wickedness.